We began to look at Cubism in my last lecture, and now we're going to return to Demoiselle d'Avignon to look at more examples of this genre. I've combined two summary slides here, but it's easier to understand Cubist art by looking at it. Whether or not it was itself a Cubist painting, Demoiselle d'Avignon clearly sparked this major new artistic movement. Cubism itself broke into at least two phases. Before I talk about these, let's go back to Simon Schama and his discussion of Demoiselle d'Avignon. I've already mentioned the influence of African art on expressionist painters such as Duran and Matisse. In this painting, the mask motif should be clear. So are the distortions, the flattened space, the fragmented bodies and black lines used as a grid or scaffolding. After the brilliant colors of the expressionists, sometimes bright and pure, sometimes harsh and jarring, we now encounter a much more limited palette of pinks, grays, blues, and browns. Actually, art historians debate whether Les Demoiselles d'Avignon is an expressionist work or the first Cubist painting. Note that I've stuck it in both lectures. Note, too, that the composition, like Cézanne's still life and landscape paintings, is filled with contradictory points of view. It really plays with the viewer's perspective and deliberately disorients that perspective. So we look down at the table at the bottom of the canvas, but we encounter the nudes head on. We see the eyes full face and the noses in profile. The seated figure on the lower right faces her colleagues, but manages to turn her head 180 degrees to look at us. We've already seen a move toward abstraction. In the case of Kandinsky, we've already arrived at abstraction. But it's important to understand that artists had different reasons for creating abstract art. Some artists, such as Kandinsky and Mondrian, whom we'll encounter later, were seeking a kind of spiritual transcendence, an escape from the material world into a deeper underlying reality. But especially early in the 20th century, most abstract artists were not so much escaping the material world as trying to capture it, to distill its essential qualities, and somehow, again, capture these qualities in painting and sculpture. The Cubists really fit into this second category. And Cubists themselves, perhaps appropriately, splintered into different categories. The movement began with the Analytical Cubists, really two men, Picasso and Georges Braque. They saw themselves as dissectors, looking for essential shapes and how they interact with the negative space around them. Remember the concept of positive space, which are seen depicted in the art, and negative space, the empty space, the air. And especially they're looking at the interaction between negative and positive space from multiple perspectives when displayed on a two-dimensional surface. We'll get to Cubist sculpture a little later. Remember that this is the age of Einstein. Relativistic time and space were all the rage, and playing with perspective seemed to fit with the scientific zeitgeist. So here's a very early Cubist painting, just a year after Demoiselle d'Avignon. Picasso is reducing the house and garden to simplified geometric form, but he still maintains a color difference between the house and the garden. We see the same features in this early Cubist painting by Georges Braque. I hope you got to see the Khan Academy podcast. This could almost be a Cézanne. Braque is still moving toward abstraction. But here, Braque pretty clearly arrives at abstraction. In this painting, the objects are broken down much further, and with it, the distinction between object and its surrounding space is broken down as well. This blurring of positive and negative space is enhanced by the almost monochromatic use of colors. The Portuguese, by the way, was a man who played the guitar at a bar in Marseille. Notice how Braque asks the viewer to look for familiar shapes, such as the sound hole in the guitar, but also to read into the painting what we know about the subject. Braque also inserts text into the painting, but it's not a text we can easily read or interpret. Is the message here maybe that we need to read meaning into a painting? Certainly Picasso and Braque believed that viewers needed to learn how to read Cubist paintings, just as they had learned to read illusionistic paintings that employed linear perspective. Again, Einstein was forcing everyone to rethink the relationship between time and space. Picasso and Braque were going to do their part. Picasso and Braque were moving away from bright colors, but Robert Delaunay deliberately uses color to capture harmony and dissonance. This colorful version of Cubism was labeled Orphism, after the Greek god of music. We saw the same effect in Mark's Fate of the Animals, which I've stuck into a corner of this slide. It's a work that I think could probably be labeled either expressionist or cubist/orphistic. For what it's worth, I have never seen orphism show up on the AP test, so I'm not including it in the list of isms that you need to stick in the hard drive or make a presentation about. Watch me turn out to be wrong. Here are a couple more examples of Delaunay's works, mostly just because I like them. If you're wondering who Blériot was, he was an aviator, inventor, and engineer who is credited with inventing car headlights, which you can kind of make out. And here are a few more works by Delaunay. As you can see, I like him, and I tend to like bright colors. Analytical cubism basically smashes an object to see all of its individual pieces, but the next stage of cubism, which began in 1912, saw Picasso and Braque taking those individual smashed pieces and now reassembling them in a new way, hence the term synthesis, or putting together. In the process, they invented the collage. So here's an example of synthetic cubism. This one isn't in your textbook, but it's actually one of Picasso's most famous works. Notice that in this painting, it's easier to make out three figures, but does that middle figure actually have a face? Notice, too, how the ground of the painting shifts from left to right. And did you see the dog under the table? In this painting, Picasso also embraces somewhat brighter colors. Here are a couple more examples of synthetic cubism. During the synthetic cubism phase, Picasso and Braque also began incorporating real objects into their paintings. A photolithographed pattern of a cane chair seat reproduced on oilcloth that's glued onto canvas, and a rope border. And here are 3 Braque collages with actual newspaper articles glued into the painting. This Picasso collage dates from what is known as his Rococo Cubist period. You remember Rococo art, right? What might make this Rococo? Maybe the evocation of luxury items? The hint of aristocratic decadence? Anyway, I thought that was fun. This is actually a sculpture made from sheet metal. Even in his 3-dimensional object, Picasso is playing with the juxtaposition of 2- and 3-dimensional depictions of space and volume. While abstract, this work comes closer to what we think of as sculpture, in part because it's made of a traditional sculpture material, bronze. But you still see the Cubist emphasis on reducing objects to planes, or in this case, to stylized geometric volumes. Here are 3 more works by the same sculptor. These 2 sculptures illustrate another Cubist obsession with voids or holes, or what art analysts call, again, negative space. Note that the woman on the left has no face, but a very evocative face-shaped hole, while the statue on the right of the same subject really seems to be more void than object. Let me hit you with one last ism before I close. Some artists, most notably the famous architect Le Corbusier, whom we'll see very soon, criticized Cubism, arguing that it was too cerebral, too brainy, that is, too out of touch with the realities of modern life, and especially the realities of the industrial machine age. Purists admired what they saw as the clean, functional lines of modern machines, but they were also fascinated by the Cubist dissection of objects in space. Leger is the best known of the Purist painters. In this painting, he tries to capture the infrastructure and the pulsing life of the modern city. Why machines are pure? I'm not sure. But Purism is a good lead into Futurism, which is where I'll begin my next lecture. Here, though, first are a few more paintings by Leger. I've been to weddings like that. If you think art got weird, stay tuned. It is about to get a whole lot weirder.